Hello and welcome. My name is Tanya Day and I'm with the Orange County Historical Museum. Today, we are honored to host Tom Magnuson. Tom Magnuson is the founder and CEO of the Trading Path Association. The Trading Path Association is a nonprofit organization committed to finding and protecting remnants of the contact era in the Southeast. It does so by finding the old trade routes of England's first frontier, the backcountry of the Southeast. Prior to founding the Trading Path Association, Magnuson enjoyed an unconventional high-tech career, first in the integrated circuit industry and government service, and later in the software business. Tom Magnuson today will be presenting some of his findings from his 30 years of studying the earliest commercial transportation networks in the Southeast of North America, including the Carolinas. Today, he will focus on the first contacts made between Native Americans and Europeans in the Sounds during the time period between 1524 and 1650. And with that, Tom, I will let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Tanya. It's one of my goals today is to dispel some of the images created about Native Americans at the time of contact. The word savage gets used way too much. They were a highly refined people, and I'll touch on this in more depth. But they were virtually urbane, and far more so than the Europeans they were dealing with. So let me get into it here. We have a lot of map evidence from 16th century maps that show that just about every explorer that coasted the Atlantic coast of North America popped into the Sounds at one point or another. And Verrazano started his tour of the Atlantic coast up in the cod fisheries on the Grand Banks. And I believe at that point, he probably learned about the reprovisioning opportunity in the Sounds. The Sounds were a lot closer to the cod fisheries than were any of the European ports they would have had to go to refurbish and replenish. The cod fisheries did not have a good relationship with local natives. But the fisheries were far enough away from the Sounds in Carolina that the natives were not spooked by them. They were not afraid of their Europeans. In fact, they took advantage of every passing ship they possibly could. We know that the Spanish and Portuguese fleets had been harvesting cod on the Grand Banks for many years before Columbus learned about them. And of course, they had to replenish their food. They probably could get water ashore, but it was very difficult for them to get food ashore because the natives resented them. Just about everybody that thought they were looking for the Northwest Passage probably knew about the southern supply point in Carolina Sounds. At any rate, there were plenty of Europeans on the coast of Carolina for 100 years before the English got involved. These were the natives at that time of contact. The dotted red lines are all known trade routes. The one that goes from the Corrie all the way up to the Haw Old Fields is the trail that we're most interested in, because the Haw Old Fields were tied into the New Hope bottom, where they had the most fabulous corn bottom, 13 miles long and a half mile wide. And it was controlled by Corries through marriage with an Occaneechi high status woman. But here we have them. Up here is the Albemarle district. And there's no mention of the people that sold their land to the European settlers, but we know that they did, and they're Yopim Indians. And down here, these are all they all speak in the yellow is green is Iroquoian, and yellow is another Canadian group that the name is escaping me right now. Oh, I'm sorry, Algonquin, and the Siouan language is pink. And the Siouans didn't show up in the Southeast until 1300 or so, but they obviously served a great function. They were generally trade factors. They would rent out entire villages to tote products for other native groups, for the Tuscarora. And over here you have the Cherokee and Catawba, who were also Iroquoian. Although I think the Catawba tended, at least they were blended with the Siouan late in the colonial era. I have a couple pages here on Native society and economy, and this is where I hope I can dispel some of the myths. They were richly interconnected through their trade networks, very commercial people. They moved goods from areas of surplus to areas of need, and their powwows and jamborees were organized markets. They had national boundaries, but they were highly permeable to facilitate trade and information flow. And two types of travelers seem to have had freedom of movement, and that is the vision questers and the traders. Within the tribal regions, the clans facilitated these movements because all of the different tribes had the same clans. And so you could move from one village to another, and your clan relatives would host you and guarantee that you would do no harm. Clan mothers and elders would interrogate the visitors. And if like I say, if you had a local clan mother, the visitor would be provided shelter. And on top of that, visitors provided entertainment. You can imagine how tedious life was to be farming in the back country with no television or computers. And you just sat around the fire at night and told stories. And every once in a while, somebody would show up with a news story, one you hadn't heard before. And that information quality that traveled with the traders was probably their most valuable asset from the standpoint of the indigenous folks. I mentioned Eno Will, the Koori, who made a contract with the Eno-Okanichi villages in the New Hope Creek bottoms. And to bind that contract, he married a high-status Okanichi lady, and he probably guaranteed the Okanichi and Eno a market, everything they could grow, basically anything that they could spare, Will would send down to the coast. So there was this beneficial exchange. They had an oral culture, which is almost, it's almost impossible for us to imagine how well they listened and how thoroughly they carried their history and lore. One device was wampum, and the purpose of wampum was to act as a mnemonic device to help somebody remember. And using wampum, a professional memorizer could relate verbatim hundreds of years old agreements without dispute. Many Europeans commented on it, and our only analogy would probably be the heralds of the Middle Ages who memorized the heraldry. The memories of European encounters were shared and became part of the traders' network lore. So nothing happened in an isolated circumstance. If a Spaniard abused a village in what is now South Carolina, everybody in North Carolina would know about it within days or weeks. And Powhatan, who was a political leader in the Chesapeake Bay, had a very fixed and firm rule that if a village leader saw something unusual and did not immediately report it to Powhatan, he would be executed and replaced. And that was a hard, fast rule. So that whenever Europeans approached a village in Powhatan's realm, they would see runners going off in all directions. And these runners were carrying that information to the other villages and up to Powhatan. And eventually, the Europeans learned that the best way to demonstrate that they had good intentions was they would stand outside the village and discharge their muzzle-loading weapons. And the Native Americans knew that once fired, they were not suitable for anything but clubbing. They shared all their knowledge of Europeans between the tribes. There was no trade secrets. So, for example, Giovanni Verrazzano came into the Sounds in 1524 in Pamlico. And I don't know if he traded, but I do know that every ship's journal I've looked at that was coasting had canoes come out and meet them and offer for trade. And so the coastal natives were main trade factors. Henry VIII had John Rutt come along in 1527. He popped in. And between 1555 and 1700 or so, privateers and pirates were in the Sounds regularly. A privateer is basically a vessel that has a license to steal, issued by some crown, so that when the English and Dutch were fighting against Spain, the English and Dutch equipped their merchant fleets with what are called letters of marque and reprisal, which allowed them to capture any Spanish vessel and bring it into the nearest naval court to have it adjudicated and divided between the crown and the thief. There's just one war after another after 1555. And so there's plenty of chances for raiding the most valuable places, which was on the Spanish Main. And the advantage that the Sounds had was that they were less than half as far away from the Spanish Main as any other safe haven for a privateer or a pirate, either one. And De Soto really set the Spanish back. He assumed he was going to conquer the way they did in Mexico and in South America, and he just cut his way into the back country and dropped a settlement off out near Morganton, and they settled in St. Augustine allied with the Appalachian Indians. And in 1565, the Spanish slaughtered a French Protestant colony, and of course the Native Americans heard all about that. They had a mission in Virginia, which was massacred in 1571. The mining town up near Morganton was destroyed probably before 1675. And that was the end of Spain in the southeast, really. They still held on to St. Augustine, but that's going to get challenged real soon. Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. There were very few formal navies. Spain had one, but England at this point was relying on maritime commerce raiders and commerce traders in the kind of the Northern European tradition of raider trader, and that authorized them to plunder the enemies. And so in 1566 to 1648, you had an 8-year-long war where the Dutch were fighting Spain to liberate themselves. And of course, England sided with the Dutch. They were raiding on the Spanish Main and resupplying in the Sounds. 1618 to 48 was the 30 Years' War of Protestants versus Catholics. And then that led to the Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-French War, 1627 to 29, which meant that privateers from all parties were replenishing in the Sound. It was basically neutral zone. Specifically because the Spanish war vessels were too big to make it into the Sounds, and most of the privateers and pirates sailed shallower draft crafts that operated well in sound water. This is the Spanish Main, and this entire area around Mexico, all the way down here, is the Spanish Main. And the most valuable prizes were right down in here in Colombia and Venezuela. And the raiding was, there wasn't a safe port anywhere here after the privateers got to work on the Spanish Main. And Spain maintained at least a couple of fleets in the Spanish Main. But as I said, their ships were too large to get inland or in close to the shore. And the pirates and privateers generally had schooners and sloops that could work very well in shallow water. Some of them even had removable centerboards. The French are right up in here. The Spanish are right over in here. There's the only North American sites. There's Spanish at St. Augustine, and down here in the Mobile Bay area, that's Mobile Bay, and the French had some town. Ships, they carried extra crew. The pirates and privateers carried extra crew to have prize crews to put on ships that they captured. They also carried raiders, land fighters that would go ashore and attack towns from inland, so that they were always overcrewed, overmanned. They had to have sailors for their ship. They had to have raiders for attacks, and they had to have prize crews. So they were, and because they were generally small, they had to frequently resupply. As I said, the larger Spanish vessels could not maneuver in shoal water, so the Sounds were a gift to the pirates and privateers. They sit, as we know, behind the graveyard of the Atlantic, and very close to the Spanish Main and the French settlements. The English took an interest in the Southeast starting in 1585. They tried to settlement on Roanoke, and it failed. Most stupidly, they began extorting food from the natives that would have normally been willing to trade, but they didn't want to pay the Native Americans price, and so they began shooting them and taking food from them. Well, that pretty well numbered their days here in North America. And in '86, one of the great pirates of all time, John Hawkins, stopped in Pamlico Sound and dropped off several hundred African mercenaries, slaves that he had bought in West Africa and used as infantrymen. And I assume that they had their weapons when they came ashore. He just didn't want to feed them on his return to England after raiding Colombia. And one can only imagine what happened in the Sounds when these people were blended in with the traders. They provided a security service, I'm sure. And Hawkins took off the surviving Roanoke settlers and brought them back to England. Some of them probably ended up in Powhatan's country, because there were reports of timbered houses on the south shore of Chesapeake that burned just as in 1607 as the English arrived. Hundreds and hundreds of privateers and pirates passed through the Sounds. And I started to make a list, and it just grew and grew and grew. The main records that you can use are court records, where they would capture and interrogate pirates. And where were you? Well, I was in Pamlico Sound. Blackbeard, the most famous North Carolina pirate, married a 16-year-old girl, his 14th marriage, in Bath. And the North Carolina governor, or the Carolina governor, let's see, 1715, it would have been North Carolina's governor, officiant for that wedding. The lieutenant governor at the same time was a privateer. 100 years of frequent exposure to Europeans before the Raleigh colony was lost. They traded with pirates and privateers to the point where in 1650 Virginia traders wanted to get in on the business. Sponsored probably by Abraham Woods and the Virginia governor Berkeley, Nathaniel Batts established a trading post in the Albemarle, and he may very well have guided Carolina's first permanent settlers into the Albemarle for his own personal security, because they were dissenter survivors of the English Civil War. And as dissenters, they were being abused by Berkeley in Virginia and by Baltimore in Maryland. So they were happy to shelter down behind the Dismal Swamp. And the governors of Virginia and Maryland were just as happy to have them there and out of their terrain. And they were too well armed to pry loose. The Opminians, apparently they were tributaries of the northern Tuscarora. They sold land to Bass and the settlers, but a stipulation in their sales agreement was that the settlers would not cross the Chowan River into Tuscarora land. And the early settlers honored that term, and no one crossed into the Chowan in spite of directives from the proprietors, in spite of the governor's pleas. They even sent a Quaker governor after, in 1672, the dissenters were learned about by George Fox, the founder of the Friends Society, when he was up in Pennsylvania, and he came down and visited them. And in his journal, he said, these are godly people doing this exactly the right way. And after he left, many of them decided that they were friends, with a difference though. The difference mainly is that they had three distinct features in the Albemarle Quakers that aren't present in either the London or the Philadelphia Quakers. One, they actively encouraged women preachers, which were forbidden in both the London meeting and Philadelphia meeting. And two, they never did give up their weapons, I don't believe. I think that was self-defense was their right. And three, they just didn't have anything to do with government if they could avoid it. So for example, in the case of the Cane Creek Quaker meeting, when it came time for them to seek permission to create a Quaker meeting, they sent their agents, two lady preachers, down to Perquimans County in the Albemarle district to get permission to open a meeting. And that was in 1754 when Orange County came into being. And they felt the need to have that meeting as a defense against the Pennsylvania Quakers who were flooding into Orange County at the time. So I digress. This is a bibliography that is easy to access and very useful. The ones that I find most valuable are Gailey's Indian slave trade, and anything of Hudson's. James Merrill, Into the American Woods, is another excellent one. He's got a wonderful scene of a tribe moving their village site that he relays. And I'm trying to find, I'll have to add to this. There's another book that I have on the shelf here that is called Cotters and Squatters. And it was a book on land tenure rights in England at this time, in the 16th to 18th century, as the enclosures took place. And many of those land tenures did not make it into law here, but the English thought they would. And so they behaved as though the English land tenure laws applied here, and they went and squatted on land and waited for the owner to come and ask them to either leave or pay rent. And they would have been happy to pay rent. They wouldn't have been quite so happy to leave. At any rate, there's a full bibliography on the Trading Paths Facebook page, which goes into hundreds of entries. Has anyone got any questions about what I've been saying here today? I would hope that you bring them up now. You can send your questions to me. My email address is tmagnuson@tradingpath.org. TMAGNUSON @tradingpath, single word, no space, .org.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Tom. I really like that you were able to sort of dig into this and dispel a lot of these myths, especially, I think that it taps into a really even modern human phenomenon that we have when we come across people that function in a different way than ourselves. We automatically assume that we must be superior, and that is absolutely not always the case. And I think that by re-examining this in a different framework, you're really truly understanding how rich some of these first interactions were.
Well, the villages, for example, every village was multilingual. That is, they needed that to be traders. And the Occaneechi Siouan language was the trade language of the Southeast. Everybody knew a little bit of it. And the Siouans themselves, the Occaneechi, had multiple linguists in their villages to make contracts, to make sure there was a clear understanding of who is going to do what for whom. So that's very sophisticated stuff.
Well, fantastic. And as you heard, Tom does have an email address that you can reach out to him with any questions, and he would absolutely love that. And if you'd like to get in touch with the Orange County Historical Museum, you can visit us online at www.orangehistorync.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.